Your phone buzzes for no reason, and your hand still reaches for it. Nothing happened. You check anyway. Somewhere in your chest is a small, restless itch that only silence seems to trigger, and you've spent your whole life assuming that itch is a modern problem, something built by apps and notifications, and a world that never lets you sit still. But the real answer is far stranger. 3,000 years before the first screen ever lit up a room, people were lying awake with that exact same itch, and they built an entire civilization's worth of tools to kill it. Picture a mud brick house on the west bank of the Nile, the sun long gone, the fields quiet, no work left to do until morning, no television, no radio, not even reliable candlelight, just you, your family, and hours of unfilled time stretching out in front of you like a held breath. What do you do with that? You play a game. Not a modern one, a board carved from limestone or painted onto wood, divided into 30 squares in 3 rows of 10, with a set of cone-shaped and spool-shaped pieces waiting to be moved. This game was called Senet, and it may be the oldest board game ever discovered, with versions dating back over 5,000 years. Egyptologist Peter Piccione, who has spent much of his career studying Senet boards recovered from tombs and settlements, has argued that the game evolved far beyond simple entertainment. Early boards seem to have been played purely for fun. Later boards, inscribed with spells and prayers, seem to have been played as a kind of dialogue with fate itself, each move a small negotiation with the afterlife. Think about that for a moment. A pastime invented to pass a dull evening, slowly transformed into a tool for imagining what happens after death. Isn't it strange that boredom, of all things, might have shaped how an entire culture pictured eternity? Senet boards have been found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Multiple boards, in fact, packed carefully among his most valuable possessions, as if killing time was something a king expected to keep doing forever. But games were only one layer of the defense against empty hours. Move outside the house, past the fields, into the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, where the laborers who built the royal tombs lived with their families for generations. These were skilled artisans, with actual days off, a work schedule surprisingly close to a modern one, and evidence suggests they filled their downtime the way people always have. They gossiped, they doodled. Archaeologists have recovered thousands of small fragments of broken pottery and flaked limestone called ostraca, covered in quick sketches, jokes, love notes, and even satirical drawings mocking their own bosses. One sketch shows a mouse pharaoh being served by cat servants. Another mocks a foreman for napping on the job. This wasn't official art commissioned by the state. This was doodling, plain and simple, the same restless creative impulse that makes you sketch in the margin of a notebook during a meeting that won't end. Egyptologist Joyce Tyldesley, who has written extensively on daily life in ancient Egypt, points out that these ostraca reveal something official monuments never do. They show ordinary people amusing themselves, entertaining each other, and quietly mocking authority, exactly the way people still do today when a workday drags on too long. So the pyramids tell you what ancient Egypt wanted to be remembered for. The doodles tell you what ancient Egyptians actually felt like on a slow afternoon. And boredom didn't stop at sketching. It reached all the way into literature. Long narrative tales were copied and recopied by scribes, not for religious duty, but purely because people wanted a good story. The tale of Sinuhe follows a nobleman fleeing into exile and adventure. The tale of the shipwrecked sailor describes a man marooned on a magical island guarded by a giant talking serpent. These weren't sacred texts locked away in temples. They were popular fiction, copied by students practicing their handwriting, read aloud for entertainment, passed hand to hand the way you might pass along a favorite show to a friend. Egyptologist R.B. Parkinson, who has translated and studied a large portion of surviving Middle Kingdom literature, has described this period as something close to a literary boom, driven not by religious necessity, but by genuine public appetite for narrative. People wanted stories, not because a god demanded it, because sitting with nothing to think about is uncomfortable, and a good story is one of the oldest known cures. Isn't it strange to imagine a Bronze Age teenager, 3,500 years ago, memorizing a shipwreck story purely because it was thrilling? Music filled the same gap. Harps, lyres, handheld drums, and sets of cymbal-like clappers turn up constantly in tomb paintings, often shown at banquets alongside dancers, acrobats, and men clearly overserved on beer. Beer itself was less a treat and more a daily staple, brewed thick and nutritious, consumed by nearly everyone, and central to festivals that could stretch on for days. The beautiful Festival of the Valley brought entire communities across the Nile for feasting, music, and visits to the tombs of ancestors, turning grief and boredom alike into something communal and loud. Children had their own defenses. Archaeologists have recovered wooden paddle dolls, spinning tops, clay balls, and small carved animals with movable jaws, toys built for exactly the same purpose your childhood toys served. Keep small hands busy. Keep small minds occupied. Some things about raising a bored child, it turns out, have not changed in 4,000 years. Even riddles and wordplay show up in surviving texts, puzzles clearly meant to be solved socially, passed between friends the way you might send a trick question to a group chat today. The format is different, the impulse behind it is not. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. You might assume all of this points to a relaxed, playful society, but look closer at who is doing most of this recorded amusement, and the picture shifts. Scribes, artisans, and workers left behind games, doodles, and stories. Farmers, who made up the overwhelming majority of the population, left almost none. Not because they weren't bored, almost certainly because they lacked the literacy, the materials, or the leisure time to record it. The boredom of ancient Egypt was universal. The evidence of it survived almost entirely for people with the privilege to write it down. Which means every clever doodle, every satirical sketch, every Senet board buried in a tomb is a message from the literate few, not the silent many, who also stared at empty evenings and had no way to leave a trace. Doesn't that reframe every ancient artifact you've ever seen in a museum case? Not proof of a whole society's leisure, proof of who was allowed to record theirs. Bring it back to tonight. You still reach for a screen the instant a room goes quiet. An ancient Egyptian reached for a Senet board, a scrap of limestone, or a story about a talking serpent on a magical island. Different tools, same itch. The same restless mind refusing to sit in silence, stretching back through every version of humanity that has ever existed. Your hand still reaches for the phone the second nothing happens. Somewhere in that small, restless itch, a scribe 3,000 years dead is reaching for exactly the same thing.